Morning light streamed through the wide windows of the Carters' Nashville home, reflecting off the polished oak floor of the living room. Elizabeth Carter, known to everyone as Liz, sat at the kitchen island, scrolling through a gardening project on her tablet. Her brown hair was pulled back into a loose bun, and her blue eyes studied the lines of the plans. She was in her element. Landscape design required both creativity and precision, and Liz was adept at balancing those worlds. A cup of cold coffee sat on the table in front of her, and a half-eaten piece of toast lay next to it, which she took a bite of without thinking, her eyes glued to the screen. "Liz, you're not eating properly again." Her husband David's voice came from the back of the kitchen. He was standing at the stove, deftly flipping pancakes in a frying pan. David Carter, a 40-year-old music producer, looked like he'd just stepped out of a studio. A worn-out t-shirt with the logo of an old rock band, jeans, and a light stubble on his face. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, but that was his charisma, casual, almost boyish. "I'm eating," Liz said, not looking up. "It's just, this project. It's huge. If I do it, it could be a breakthrough." "A breakthrough?" David raised an eyebrow, putting pancakes on a plate. "You're already a star, Liz. Your gardens are in magazines, clients are queuing. Where else do you need to break through?" She smiled, but there was a trace of weariness in it. David was right. Her landscape career was flourishing. She was creating gardens for luxury homes all over Tennessee, and her name was increasingly being heard in professional circles. But this new project, a garden for the villa of fashion mogul Nathan Crow, was different. It was a chance to go national, to work with a man whose name opened doors to big money and influence. "It's not just a garden, David," she said, finally putting down her tablet. "It's like creating a story. Nathan Crow wants his villa to be a symbol, and I have to make it happen." David placed the plate of pancakes in front of her, pushing the maple syrup towards her. "Nathan Crow, huh? The guy you see on every channel?" There was a hint of mockery in his voice. "Don't get carried away by his glamour. We have our own history here, you know." Liz rolled her eyes, but smiled. David was always like that, straightforward, with a hint of sarcasm, but underneath it all, he cared. They had been married for 18 years, and their marriage, while not without its rough edges, was solid. Or so it seemed. Their children, Sophia and Jacob, were the pride of their lives. Sophia, a 16-year-old senior already preparing for college, and Jacob, a 14-year-old skateboarding enthusiast, was the life of the party. Their home in suburban Nashville, with a neat garden that Liz had designed herself, was their little world. "Mom, are you working again?" Sophia walked into the kitchen, fiddling with the strap of her backpack. Her blonde hair, inherited from her father, was braided. "You promised to look at my college essays." "Oh, Sophie, I'm sorry." Liz pushed the tablet away. "Tonight, okay? We'll sit together after dinner." "If you don't sit over your drawings again." Sophia glanced at the tablet. "What kind of project is so important?" "A garden for a villa." Liz shrugged, trying to sound casual. "The client is influential. If it works out, it could open new doors for me." "Powerful, then," Sophia grinned. "That trendy guy? Crow? I saw him on Instagram. He's like a billionaire." "Not a billionaire, but close," Liz laughed. "And stop spying on my clients." Jacob burst into the kitchen, grabbing a pancake straight from the plate. "If he's so cool, maybe he'll give you a yacht," he winked, dodging David's playful slap on the back of the head. "Jacob, don't talk with your mouth full." David shook his head, but a smile flickered in his eyes. "And anyway, your mother can manage without yachts." Breakfast passed in its usual chaos. Sophia discussed the school play, Jacob complained about the physics teacher, and Liz and David exchanged short remarks. But beneath the morning noise, Liz felt a slight tension. Her thoughts kept returning to the project. Nathan Crow was more than just a client, he was a challenge. His reputation, his charisma, his world of glitter, all lured her. She didn't admit it even to herself, but somewhere deep inside, she was already anticipating their first meeting. Later, after the kids had left for school and David had gone to the studio, Liz was alone in her home office. The room was her sanctuary. The walls were covered with sketches of gardens. The shelves were filled with books on botany and design. She opened her laptop and began scrolling through the materials on the Crow Villa. This was not just a plot of land, it was a canvas on which she could create a masterpiece. Nathan wanted the garden to reflect his personality, bold, sophisticated, with a touch of drama. Liz was already imagining cascading flowering shrubs, winding paths, and a central fountain that would be the heart of the composition. Her phone vibrated, and a message appeared on the screen from a colleague, Sarah, who worked with her at the design firm. Sarah, Liz, are you ready to meet Crow tomorrow? He called to check if you'd be there in person. He seems to like you. Liz frowned, but the corners of her lips twitched into a smile. Liz, don't start, Sarah. It's just business. Sarah, yeah, sure. Just be prepared. He's impressive. Liz put her phone down, feeling a slight thrill building in her chest. She knew Nathan Crow was a man used to getting what he wanted. His reputation preceded him, a successful businessman whose fashion collections set trends, and a man whose charm captivated everyone around him. Liz shook her head, clearing the thought. She was a professional, she had a family, and she wasn't going to let some tycoon throw her off track. But that night, as she cooked dinner pasta with pesto, Jacob's favorite her thoughts returned to Nathan. She imagined how he would look in his office. An expensive suit, a confident smile, a look that seemed to see right through you. Liz, where have you been? David walked into the kitchen, taking off his jacket. He had just returned from the studio, where he had spent the day working with a young singer whose album was shaping up to be a hit. You almost burned the frying pan. Oh, sorry. Liz quickly removed the pan from the heat. I was just thinking about work. About Crow? David narrowed his eyes, but his tone was more playful than accusatory. Don't fall in love with your millionaire. Very funny, Liz threw a kitchen towel at him. You better help me set the table. David laughed, but Liz saw him glance at her before turning away to the cupboard for the plates. He was always observant, picking up on the smallest details, a quality that made him a great producer, and possibly dangerous when it came to her secrets. Dinner passed quietly. Sophia talked about her role in the school play, Jacob showed off his new skateboarding trick, and Liz tried to stay engaged. But her mind kept drifting to the next day's meeting. She imagined walking into Nathan's office, presenting her sketches, the way he'd look at her. It was silly, almost childish, but she couldn't stop herself. After the kids went to their rooms and David turned on the TV to watch the Titans game, Liz settled down next to him on the couch. She rested her head on his shoulder, trying to recapture the cozy feeling they always had. But something was wrong. David put his arm around her, but his touch felt mechanical, and her mind was elsewhere. Are you okay? He asked, not taking his eyes off the screen. Yeah, just tired, Liz said, but her voice was shaking. She knew that wasn't the whole truth. Something inside her was already starting to change, and she was afraid David would sense it. It was a gloomy morning in Nashville, with low clouds that seemed to weigh down on the city. Liz Carter stood in front of the mirror in her office, adjusting the dark green jacket that perfectly highlighted her blue eyes. She had chosen the outfit for a reason. It was professional, but with just the right amount of class that she hoped would impress Nathan Crow. Her fingers fiddled nervously with the hem of her jacket as she checked to make sure everything was in place. A folder of sketches, a tablet with a 3D model of a garden, a notebook of notes. Today was her first official meeting with Nathan, and Liz could feel her pulse quickening. Relax, Liz, she muttered to her reflection. It's just work. But she knew that wasn't quite true. Nathan Crow was more than just a client. His reputation, his charisma, his world, all of it stirred a curiosity in her that she tried to suppress. Liz shook her head, clearing it, and grabbed her bag. It was time to go. Nathan's office was downtown, in a glass skyscraper that towered over Nashville like a beacon. Liz parked, glanced at her reflection in the rearview mirror, and took a deep breath. She was ready, or almost ready. Inside the building, she was greeted by the smell of expensive coffee and a light hum of voices. The receptionist, a young woman with a perfect hairdo, led Liz into the elevator, which silently took her to the 22nd floor. When the doors opened, Liz found herself in a spacious office with panoramic windows overlooking the city. The walls were covered with photographs of fashion shows, and on the table stood a model of a dress that looked like it had just stepped off the catwalk. "Miss Carter?" Nathan Crow's voice came from the back of the room, and Liz turned. He stood by the window, wearing a dark blue suit that fit him like it was made for him. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and his smile, the one Sarah had warned him about, was both warm and dangerous. Liz felt her heart skip a beat. "Mr. Crow," she stepped forward, extending her hand. "It's nice to finally meet you in person." "Nathan, please." He shook her hand, holding it a little longer than necessary. "Can I call you Liz? I hear you're the best landscaper in Tennessee." "You're flattering me," Liz smiled, trying to control herself. "But I'll try to live up to expectations." "Oh, I'm sure you'll outdo them." Nathan pointed to the leather sofa by the window. "Have a seat. Would you like some coffee? Or maybe something stronger?" "Coffee will do," Liz replied, sitting down and opening her sketchbook. "I brought the first sketches. Want to see them?" Nathan nodded, but instead of sitting at the table, he settled next to her on the couch, a little closer than Liz had expected. She could smell his cologne, something woody with a hint of citrus. Trying not to get distracted, she began laying out the sketches. "Here's the basic concept," she began, gesturing to the drawing. "I thought a garden shouldn't just be beautiful, but also tell a story. Your villa is a reflection of your brand, bold, elegant, dramatic. I'm suggesting a central fountain surrounded by winding natural stone paths and cascading flowering plants that will change with the seasons." Nathan listened attentively, his head bowed. His gaze slid over the sketches, but Liz felt that he was looking at her too. "That's impressive, Liz," he said when she finished. "You really understand what I want. But you know, a garden isn't just about plants. It's about the atmosphere. It's about making people feel alive." "I agree," Liz nodded, trying to focus on the conversation. "So I added mood elements, benches for privacy, lighting that changes in the evening, and even a small waterfall." "A waterfall?" Nathan raised an eyebrow, and his smile widened. "That's bold. I like bold." Liz felt her cheeks warm and quickly looked down at the sketches. "This is just the beginning," she said. "We can work out the details if you have any wishes." "Oh, I have many wishes." Nathan leaned a little closer, and his voice became quieter. "But not only about the garden." Liz froze. She knew he was flirting, and it was expected, but it was still unsettling. She cleared her throat, trying to get the conversation back on track. "Then let's discuss the budget and timeline," she suggested, opening her tablet. "I've prepared a preliminary estimate." Nathan laughed, leaning back on the couch. "Are you always so businesslike, Liz? Relax. We've just started working together. We'll have time for the numbers." "I just want to get this straight," she said, trying to sound confident. "It's a big project." "And it will be great," Nathan looked her straight in the eyes. "Because I trust you. You are special." Liz felt her heart start to beat faster again. She knew she should set boundaries, but something in his eyes, the confidence, the interest, the hint of something more kept her quiet. The meeting lasted another hour. They discussed the details of the project, but Nathan kept turning the conversation to the personal, asking about her favorite places in Nashville, how she got into design, even her taste in music. Liz answered, trying to be polite but not too open. But each question, each easy chuckle, seemed to pull her into his orbit. As she left the office, her thoughts were in turmoil. Nathan was everything she had imagined, charming, smart, a little cocky. But that was the danger. She got into her car, threw the folder on the passenger seat, and took a deep breath. "It's just a job, Liz," she told herself again. But there was no longer the same confidence in her voice. At home, the usual chaos awaited her. Jacob was running around the living room trying to find his sneakers for his workout, and Sophia was sitting on the couch, staring at her phone. David hadn't returned from the studio, yet he often stayed late, working on the new album of a young singer, Leela, whose voice, he said, was pure gold. Mom, you promised to look at my essay. Sophia looked up from her phone as Liz walked in. I know. Liz raised her hands in surrender. Let's do it after dinner, okay? I just came from a meeting. That hip guy, Jacob grinned, tying his laces. Is he really as cool as he looks on Instagram? He's a professional. Liz tried to sound neutral. And yes, the project is cool. Well, the main thing is that he doesn't drag you into his glamorous world. Sophia winked, but there was something wary in her tone. Liz laughed, but her mind was elsewhere. She started to cook dinner chicken and vegetables, but her hands moved automatically. Nathan's words kept running through her head. You're special. It was so trite, so obvious, but somehow it worked. She felt alive, as if someone had turned on the light in the room where she'd been sitting in the dark for too long. When David returned home, he looked tired but happy. Leela was on fire today, he said, taking off his jacket. I think this album is going to blow up the charts. Great, Liz smiled, but her voice was a little distracted. How does she handle the pressure? Leela, she's like a tank, David laughed, but then looked at Liz more closely. And you look thoughtful. I'm just tired, Liz shrugged, turning back to the stove. It was a long meeting. With Crow, David leaned against the kitchen island, crossing his arms. How is he? Not too cocky. He's charismatic. Liz chose her words carefully. He knows what he wants. David nodded, but his gaze lingered on her a little longer than usual. The main thing is that he knows where the boundaries are. Liz felt a pang of guilt, even though she had done nothing. She knew that David noticed everything, from her tone to her gestures. He was like a lie detector, and it scared her. Everything is under control, she said, trying to sound confident. It's just a job. Rain pounded the windows of the Carter house, creating a soft but persistent backdrop to the morning bustle. Liz stood at the sink, washing the last of her oatmeal off her plates, while Sophia and Jacob got ready for school. Her movements were mechanical, her thoughts far away. It had been a week since she had first met Nathan Crow, and she hadn't been able to get him out of her head since then. His voice, his confident smile, the hint of innuendo in every word, all of it settled in her mind like pollen on the petals of her favorite peonies. Mom, you're daydreaming again. Sophia walked into the kitchen, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a high ponytail, and she was holding her phone, messages flashing across the screen. You promised to take me to rehearsal after school. Oh, right. Liz wiped her hands on a towel, forcing a smile. 5, huh? 5:30, Sophia rolled her eyes. I reminded you 3 times. I'm sorry, Sophie. Liz felt a pang of guilt. I'll remember. Jacob burst into the kitchen, grabbing an apple from the table. Mom, if you're thinking about your fashion client again, I'll ask Dad to take Sophie. He winked, dodging his sister's jab. Jacob, don't start, Liz frowned, but her lips twitched into a smile. Go to school, both of you. I'll handle it. As the children ran out of the house, slamming the door, Liz was left alone in the quiet kitchen. She looked at her phone, lying on the table. There was a new message from Sarah, her colleague. Sarah, Crow called again. I want another meeting. Says he needs your brilliant ideas. When are you free? Liz sighed, her pulse quickening. She knew Nathan didn't just want to discuss the sketches. His interest in her was obvious, and worse, she couldn't deny that it flattered her. But she had David at home, their children, the life they'd been building for nearly 2 decades. She couldn't let herself get carried away. David walked into the kitchen, holding a mug of coffee. His dark hair was still damp from the shower, and his studio logo t-shirt was slightly wrinkled. He looked tired, but his eyes were as alert as ever, as if scanning everything around him. Are you heading to the studio early today? Liz asked, trying to sound casual. Yep, Leela wants to re-record the vocals for the track, David replied, setting his mug down on the table. She's good, but she's pushing the high notes too hard. It'll take some work. Leela, huh? Liz smiled, but her voice came out a little sharper than she intended. You've been talking about her a lot lately. David narrowed his eyes, catching her tone. It's a job, Liz. She's talented, and I'm trying to get the best out of her. You know how it is. I know, Liz said, turning toward the sink to hide her face. She didn't want to start an argument, but something about the mention of Leela, the young, aspiring singer David had spent so much time with made her feel a little jealous. Or maybe it was her own guilt projected onto him. And you? David crossed his arms, leaning against the kitchen island. Back to your fashion mogul? What's his name, Crow? Nathan, Liz answered a little faster than she should have, and immediately regretted it. Yes, we have another meeting. We need to finalize the sketches. That's a lot of meetings for one garden, David said, a hint of mockery in his voice. Does he want you to discuss every bush with him? Liz turned to face him, irritation rising in her chest. It's a big project, David. You know how it works. Clients can be demanding. Demanding, he repeated, looking her straight in the eye. Just make sure he doesn't get too demanding. Liz opened her mouth to protest, but decided against it. She didn't want to escalate the conversation. Instead, she grabbed her bag and keys. I'm leaving. See you in the evening. Aha, David nodded, but his gaze remained heavy. Good luck with your tycoon. Liz walked out of the house, her cheeks burning. She knew David hadn't said that lightly. He always noticed little things, her tone, her gestures, her mood. And now he clearly sensed that something was wrong, although she wasn't ready to admit what it was. At the office, Liz tried to focus on her work, but her thoughts kept returning to her conversation with David. She hadn't done anything wrong yet, but Nathan Crow had taken up too much space in her head. She opened the sketches of the garden, but instead of working on them, she began to replay their last meeting in her mind. His smile, his voice, his words, "You are special." It was so trite, but somehow it worked. Liz, are you okay? Sarah, her colleague, poked her head into her office. Her red hair was pulled back into a neat bun, and she was holding a folder of documents. You've been sitting over those drawings for an hour, but you can't seem to see them. It's okay, Liz forced herself to smile. I'm just thinking a lot. About Crow, Sarah smirked, sitting on the edge of her desk. Listen, I saw the way he looked at you at that meeting. This guy clearly has more than just a garden in his head. Sarah, stop it. Liz shook her head, but her cheeks turned traitorously red. It's just business. Yeah, sure, Sarah winked. Just remember, you've got a great husband and 2 kids at home. Don't let the tycoon get to you. Liz nodded, but her smile was forced. She knew Sarah was right, but it didn't help. Nathan was like a magnet, and she felt herself being drawn to him, despite her best efforts to resist. At home that evening, the atmosphere was even more tense. Liz drove Sophia to rehearsal, but was 15 minutes late because she was stuck in traffic, thinking about Nathan. Sophia, usually patient, was irritated. Mom, you promised to be on time, she said, getting into the car after rehearsal. What's wrong? You seem not here. Sorry, Sophie. Liz gripped the steering wheel. Just a lot of work. Is it because of that client? Sophia looked at her with narrowed eyes. Dad acts weird when he talks about him, too. Dad's just. Liz hesitated. He's worried about me. It's a big project. Well, the main thing is that you and Dad don't start arguing, Sophia shrugged, but her voice was serious. Jacob says that you and Dad are kind of cold to each other. Liz felt her throat tighten. She didn't want the kids to notice the tension, but it seemed they had already seen it all. We're fine, Sophie, she said, trying to sound reassuring. We just both have a lot of work to do. When they got home, David was in the living room, looking over the notes for Leela's new track. He looked up when Liz walked in, but his smile was reserved. How was the rehearsal? He asked, addressing Sophia more than Liz. It's fine, Sophia shrugged and went to her room, leaving her parents alone. Liz sat down on the sofa, feeling the fatigue wash over her like a wave. She wanted to say something to clear the air, but the words wouldn't come. David put the notes down and looked at her. "You're late today," he noted. "Crow again?" "No," Liz shook her head. "Just traffic." And Sophia was late for rehearsal. David nodded, but his eyes were wary. "You just look out of place. Are you sure everything's okay?" "Yes, David." Liz felt her irritation rising again. "I'm just tired. Don't look for problems where there aren't any." "I'm not looking for trouble." His voice grew firmer. "But I know you, Liz. There's something you're not telling me." Liz stood up, unable to meet his gaze. "I'm going to bed," she said, heading for the stairs. "See you in the morning." David didn't answer, just watched her go. Liz could feel his gaze on her back, and it was almost tangible. She knew he was right. She was not telling the whole truth. Not about her actions, but about her feelings. About how Nathan Crow had taken up too much space in her thoughts, and how scared she was to admit it, even to herself. The sun was filtering through the old oak trees that surrounded Nathan Crow's property on the outskirts of Nashville. Liz stood in the middle of the future garden, holding a tablet with a 3D model, taking notes as workers set up temporary markers for paths. The air was warm, with a faint smell of freshly cut grass, and Liz felt in her element. Here, among the earth and plants, she was confident in herself, in her decisions. But when she looked up and saw Nathan walking across the field toward her, her confidence began to crack. Nathan Crow looked like he'd stepped off the cover of a magazine. Dark jeans, a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, sunglasses pushed casually onto his forehead. His walk was light but purposeful, and Liz felt her pulse quicken. This was their third meeting in 2 weeks, and each one left her feeling more and more unsettled. "Liz," Nathan smiled, stepping closer. "You look like you were born in this place." "It's my job," Liz smiled back, trying to keep her tone professional. "I always feel better when I can dig in the ground." "Digging in the ground?" Nathan laughed, taking off his glasses and looking at her. "You make it sound so easy, and I see you turning a vacant lot into a work of art." Liz felt her cheeks warm up. She turned away, pretending to check something on her tablet. "It's a team effort," she said. "My sketches are just the beginning. The workers, the botanists, the engineers all contribute." "Modest suits you." Nathan stepped closer, and Liz caught a whiff of his cologne. "But I know this wouldn't have happened without your vision. You're special, Liz." She froze. He had used that word, special, at their first meeting, and it struck her again like a spark. Liz knew she should change the subject, set boundaries, but instead she simply nodded, at a loss for words. "Let's take a walk," Nathan suggested, pointing to the area. "Tell me what you see." Liz began to explain, showing where the fountain would be, where the winding paths would be, where the beds of seasonal flowers would be. Nathan listened attentively, asked questions, but his gaze kept returning to her. Liz felt it, and her voice became a little less confident. "There will be a bench here," she pointed to a shady corner, "for privacy, a place to sit and think." "Privacy," Nathan nodded, his voice quieter. "I like places like this. And you, Liz, do you like privacy?" She looked at him, and for a second their eyes met. There was something in his eyes that made her heart skip a beat. "Sometimes," she answered, trying to sound neutral. "But I have a family, children. Solitude is a rare luxury." "Family," Nathan smiled, but there was something playful in his smile. "It's important, but even busy moms need time for themselves, right?" Liz didn't answer, just nodded, turning back to her tablet. She needed a distraction. Nathan was too close, his voice too soft, his presence too tangible. She knew he was flirting, and worse, she liked it. After the site inspection, Nathan suggested they have dinner at a small restaurant nearby to discuss the details. Liz wanted to decline, but he insisted, saying that it was part of the job to establish a rapport with the client. She agreed, although a voice inside her was screaming that this was a bad idea. The restaurant was cozy, with dim lighting and wooden tables. They sat by the window, and Liz tried to focus on the project, but Nathan kept turning the conversation to personal matters. "Tell me about yourself, Liz," he said, sipping his wine. "How did you become a designer? It's not just a job, it's a passion." Liz shrugged, feeling the wine relax her. "I've always loved nature," she began. "As a child, I spent hours in my grandmother's garden. She taught me how to care for roses and how to understand what plants need. Then I went to study architecture, but I realized that buildings weren't my thing. Gardens are living stories." Nathan looked at her with genuine interest. "Living stories," he repeated. "That's beautifully put. What else inspires you, besides gardens?" Liz hesitated. She didn't want to get too personal, but the wine and his gaze were doing their job. "My family," she said finally. "My children, Sophia and Jacob. They keep me afloat." "And your husband?" Nathan leaned forward slightly. "Is he an inspiration too?" Liz felt her throat tighten. She wanted to say something easy, but the truth was more complicated. "David, he's wonderful," she replied, but her voice wavered. "He works a lot, and so do I. Sometimes we just get lost in the routine." Nathan nodded as if he understood more than she said. "Routine can be suffocating," he said quietly. "Sometimes you need something to shake you up, to feel alive." Liz looked at him, and for a second, she thought he could see right through her. She quickly looked away, sipping her wine. "Let's get back to the project," she said, opening the folder. "I want to show you lighting options." Nathan smiled, but didn't argue. They discussed the details for another hour, but Liz felt his eyes moving over her face, her hands, her movements. When they left the restaurant, he walked her to her car. "Thank you for this evening, Liz," he said, pausing at her door. "It was inspiring." "It's work," she replied, trying to sound firm. "See you at the next meeting." "Of course," Nathan smiled, his gaze lingering on her a little longer than necessary. Liz's hands were shaking as she got into the car. She knew she'd crossed an invisible line. Not physically, but emotionally. Nathan Crow wasn't just a client, he was a temptation that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The house was quiet. David hadn't returned from the studio yet, and the kids were in their rooms. Liz walked into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. Her thoughts were in chaos. She loved David, she loved their family, but something about Nathan stirred feelings in her that she hadn't felt in a long time. It was like waking up after a long sleep. When David returned, she heard the front door open. He walked into the kitchen, throwing his keys on the table. "You've been out a long time today," he noted, opening the refrigerator. "With Crow again?" "Yes," Liz nodded, trying not to look him in the eye. "We were discussing the project. He's a demanding client." "Demanding," David repeated, a hint of mockery in his voice. "Are you sure that's all, Liz?" She turned to face him, feeling her heart squeeze. "What do you mean?" Her voice was sharper than she intended. "Nothing," David shrugged, but his gaze was heavy. "You're just different, since I started this project. I'm just tired." Liz turned away, putting the glass in the sink. "And I have a lot of work." "Aha," David nodded, but didn't move. "Just be careful, Liz. This Crow guy isn't the kind of guy you want to play with." Liz felt her cheeks heat up. She wanted to protest, to tell him he was wrong, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she muttered, "I am going to sleep. Did you click the bell? Like it? Subscribe? Then listen as secrets emerge." The Nathan Crow Gala was taking place in a historic mansion in the Nashville Hills, surrounded by lush gardens that Liz couldn't help but appreciate as they drove up the winding road. Liz's navy, backless gown flowed softly over her figure, accentuating her elegance. She fidgeted with her purse as she sat next to David, who was driving. He looked unusually formal in a black tuxedo, and his silence only added to her anxiety. "Are you okay?" David asked, glancing at her briefly. His voice was even, but Liz knew he could feel her tension. "Yeah, it's just..." These kinds of events aren't really my thing, she replied, looking out the window. Lots of people, lots of talking. Yeah, and your tycoon is at the top of it all, David chuckled, but there was a hint of sarcasm in his tone. Don't let him get to you, Liz. She turned to him, ready to argue, but thought better of it. Instead, she forced a smile. Don't worry, it's just work. But they both knew that wasn't entirely true. The last few weeks with Nathan had changed something in Liz. His attention, his words, his looks, all of it stirred up feelings in her that she tried to suppress. David, with his powers of observation, had clearly noticed, and it made her even more nervous about tonight. The mansion was flooded with light, and a line of expensive cars formed in front of the entrance. Liz and David entered the huge hall, where a crowd was already buzzing. Designers, models, local celebrities. Live music, a string quartet mingled with the hum of voices and the clink of glasses. Liz immediately felt out of place, but then Nathan caught her eye. He stood in the center of the room, surrounded by people, but his eyes immediately found her. Nathan was wearing a dark gray suit that emphasized his athletic build. His smile was dazzling, and Liz felt her heart skip a beat. Liz, he came up to them, holding out his hand. Glad you could come, and you must be David. David shook his hand, but Liz noticed his jaw tense. Yes, it's nice to meet you, David said, but his tone was reserved. I've heard a lot about you. From Liz, of course. I hope it's only good, Nathan smiled, looking at Liz. Your wife is a real talent. Her ideas for my garden. They're stunning. She knows her stuff, David nodded, but his eyes studied Nathan carefully. You seem to think highly of her. Oh, you bet, Nathan looked at Liz with a warm smile. Come on, I'll introduce you to someone. He led them to a group of people, including Leela, a young singer David had been working with in the studio. Leela was wearing a tight red dress, her dark hair flowing over her shoulders, and her smile was almost as bright as Nathan's. Liz felt a twinge of jealousy when Leela put her arm around David as if they were old friends. David, Leela laughed, touching his shoulder. I didn't think you'd leave the studio for an event like this. Liz insisted, David smiled, but his gaze slid to Liz, checking her reaction. And I couldn't pass up the chance to see her in this dress. Liz forced a smile, but her mind was in turmoil. Leela was younger, more energetic, and her casual manner with David offended Liz more than she cared to admit. Nathan, as if sensing her discomfort, took her elbow. Liz, let me steal you for a minute, he said. I want to show you something. David frowned but said nothing. Liz followed Nathan across the hall to the terrace, where the garden was overlooked by soft lanterns. This place is inspiring, isn't it? Nathan paused at the railing, looking at her. I thought you might like it. It's beautiful, Liz nodded, trying to focus on the garden rather than its proximity. But my design will be better. I'm sure, Nathan laughed, but his voice was quieter. You know, Liz, it's not often I meet people who are so passionate about what they do. It's infectious. She looked at him, feeling his words go deeper than they should. Thank you, she said quietly, but I'm just doing my job. Oh, it's more than a job, Nathan stepped closer. You create beauty, and you yourself, you are part of that beauty. Liz felt her cheeks heat up. She wanted to move away, but her feet were rooted to the spot. Luckily, they were interrupted by the announcer's voice, announcing the start of the charity auction. Nathan suggested they go back into the hall, and Liz agreed with relief. The evening went on. Auction, toasts, dancing. Liz and David danced together, but their movements were stiff, as if an invisible wall had grown between them. Liz saw Leela ask David to dance, and he accepted, laughing at something she whispered to him. Liz turned away, trying not to think about it, but her gaze was caught by Nathan, who was watching her from across the room. After dinner, Nathan approached them again, this time with Leela on his arm. Liz, David, you look great, he said, but his eyes were on Liz. I have an idea. Why don't we do a little experiment? David narrowed his eyes. What other experiment? Nathan smiled, but there was something cheeky in his smile. Weekend. Liz and I are spending time together, and you and Leela, just to shake things up. No strings attached. Liz froze, her heart pounding. She looked at David, expecting him to laugh or wave her off, but his face went stony. Are you serious? David crossed his arms, his voice cold. Is this a joke? No joke, Nathan shrugged, but his eyes never left Liz. Just a proposal. Sometimes marriage needs a little adventure. Liz felt her face heat up. She wanted to say something, but the words stuck. David turned to her, his gaze sharp as a blade. Liz, did you hear? Your client is offering to share you with me. His voice was full of sarcasm. What do you say? Liz swallowed, trying to find the words. This is ridiculous, Nathan. David and we don't play games like that. Nathan raised his hands in surrender. Okay, just an idea. No offense. But the insult had already been given. David took Liz's hand, his fingers squeezing her wrist a little tighter than usual. We have to go, he said, not looking at Nathan. Thank you for the evening. They left the mansion in silence. In the car, Liz could feel the tension between them becoming almost palpable. Did you know he was going to suggest that? David finally asked, his eyes on the road. No, of course not, Liz turned to him, her voice sharp. It was unexpected. That's unexpected, David chuckled. He's been looking at you all evening, Liz. That's not unexpected. That's fucking impudence. David, I didn't ask him to say this. Liz felt her voice shake. I just work with him. Working, he shook his head. Are you sure that's all, Liz? Because I'm not blind. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came. Instead, she turned to the window, feeling her heart tighten. The silence in the Carter house was almost palpable when Liz woke up the morning after the gala. The sun was barely filtering through the thick curtains of her bedroom, but she could no longer sleep. Beside her, David was asleep, his back turned to the wall, his breathing even, but Liz knew there was a gap between them. Nathan Crow's proposal the night before, as ridiculous as it had sounded, had left its mark not just on their marriage, but on her own mind. She lay staring at the ceiling, feeling her thoughts swirl around one name, Nathan. Liz slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake David. She pulled on a robe and went down to the kitchen, where she brewed coffee. The aroma of freshly ground beans usually calmed her, but today it only served to highlight her inner turmoil. She sat at the kitchen island, cupping her mug in her hands, trying to sort through her feelings. Nathan was a client, just a client. But his words, his look, his bold offer, all of it had awakened something in her she hadn't felt in years. Desire, passion, a sense of being alive. Mom, why are you up so early? Sophia's voice pulled Liz out of her thoughts. Her daughter walked into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes, her blonde hair disheveled from sleep. I can't sleep, Liz forced a smile, sipping her coffee. Why did you get up? Rehearsal is today at 9, Sophia yawned, opening the refrigerator. You came home late yesterday. How was your evening? Liz froze, unsure of how to respond. She couldn't tell her daughter about Nathan's offer. It was too much. It was noisy, she said finally. Lots of people, music, an auction, but beautiful. And Dad? Sophia looked at her, taking out the yogurt. He seemed to be in a bad mood when you came back. Liz felt her throat tighten. Sophia had always been observant, like David. Just tired, Liz shrugged, trying to sound casual. He's got a lot of work in the studio. Sophia nodded, but her look was skeptical. Okay, but you and Dad, are you okay? You hardly talked yesterday. We're fine, Sophie, Liz forced her smile wider. Just adult stuff. Don't worry. But Sophia didn't look convinced. She ate her yogurt in silence, and Liz felt her own words ring false. She hated lying to her daughter, but the truth was too complicated. How could she explain that her marriage was falling apart because of her own feelings for another man? As Sophia left to get ready, Liz opened her laptop to distract herself. A late-night email from Nathan appeared on the screen. Nathan Crow, Liz, thanks for yesterday. You were dazzling. I hope my proposal didn't shock you too much. Let's meet tomorrow at the site. I want to discuss new ideas. And maybe not only them. Liz felt her cheeks heat up. She quickly closed the laptop as if she were afraid someone would see. Nathan was too cocky, too confident, and it both angered and attracted her. She knew she should say something neutral, put him in his place, but her fingers froze over the keyboard. Instead, she stood up and began making breakfast for Jacob, who, as usual, had overslept. David came down half an hour later, already dressed for the studio jeans, a t-shirt with the logo of his favorite band, and a light leather jacket. He looked tired, but his eyes were as attentive as ever. "Good morning," he said, pouring himself coffee. His voice was even, but Liz caught a chill. "Good morning," she replied, not looking at him. She was cutting up some fruit for Jacob, trying to keep her hands busy. "Are you going to be in the studio for long today?" "See you later." David leaned against the tabletop, looking at her. "Leela wants to finish the track. And you? To your fashion client again?" Liz felt her heart clench. She knew he was talking about Nathan, and his tone was full of sarcasm. "Yes, to the site," she answered, trying to sound calm. "We need to check the markings." "The layout," David chuckled, sipping his coffee. "You know, Liz, I'm not an idiot. That Crow guy was looking at you like you were a trophy yesterday, and his offer. That wasn't a joke, was it?" Liz turned to face him, her hands hovering over the cutting board. "David, I didn't ask him to say that," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "It was his idea, not mine." "But you didn't look shocked." David set his mug down, his gaze hard. "You stood there, Liz, and you were silent. Like you were thinking about it." "That's not true." Liz felt her cheeks heat up. "I was shocked. I didn't know what to say." "Yeah," David nodded, but his eyes said he didn't believe it. "Just be careful, Liz. This guy isn't someone you want to play with." He took the keys and left without another word. Liz stood in the middle of the kitchen, her heart pounding. She hated this feeling like she was guilty, even though she hadn't done anything. Or had she? Her thoughts about Nathan, her reaction to his words, it was a betrayal, even if it wasn't physical. Jacob stumbled into the kitchen, grabbing a banana from the table. "Mom, did you fight with Dad again?" he asked, chewing. "No," Liz shook her head, forcing a smile. "Just adult talk. Go to school. Don't be late." When Jacob left, Liz sat at the table, her head in her hands. She felt at a crossroads. On one side was her family, her home, David, who, despite his outspokenness, had been her rock all these years. On the other was Nathan, who made her feel wanted, alive, like she was a 20-year-old again, not a mother of two drowning in routine. She opened her laptop and began writing a response to Nathan. "Liz, Nathan, thanks for the evening. Let's focus on the project. I'll be at the site tomorrow at 10. She reread the message, added a smiley face, then deleted it. She needed to keep her distance, but a part of her, the part she was trying to ignore, wanted to keep playing. Liz closed her laptop and went to get ready for work, her mind in turmoil. At the site, Nathan greeted her with the same dazzling smile. They discussed the project, walked along the lines, talked about plants and lighting, but Liz felt that every glance, every casual touch on her shoulder was part of something bigger. "Liz, have you ever thought about just running away?" he asked as they stopped at the future fountain. "Leave everything and live for yourself?" She looked at him, her heart pounding. "I have a family, Nathan," she said quietly. "I can't just run away." "But you think about it," he smiled, his voice soft but confident. "I can see it in your eyes." Liz turned away, pretending to check something on her tablet. She knew he was right. That was what scared her most. She wanted to tell him to stop playing with her, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she just nodded and said, "Let's finish with the markings. I have one more meeting." Nathan didn't press the issue, but his smile suggested he knew more than she was willing to admit. When Liz got home, she felt exhausted. David was in the studio, the kids were at their classes, and the house seemed empty. She sat in the living room, looking at the family photos on the mantelpiece. There was their wedding, the first days with Sophia, a picnic with Jacob. All of this was her life, her world. But why did Nathan Crow seem so attractive? She took out her phone and opened a message from Sarah. Sarah, so how did the meeting go? Was Crow flirting again? Liz didn't answer. She knew Sarah was joking, but those jokes struck at the heart of her fears. She wanted to be strong, she wanted to be loyal, but Nathan was like a melody she couldn't get out of her head. And the more she tried to resist, the more he pulled her in. Nashville greeted Liz with a gray fog that shrouded the city in a way that seemed to hide her turmoil. She stood at the window of her home office, looking out at the garden she had designed years ago, wet from the night's rain. Every bush, every path was her creation, but today the garden felt foreign, as if it reflected her own inner turmoil. It had been a month since the gala, and her life had been on edge ever since. Her work with Nathan Crow had become increasingly personal, and the tension with David had become more palpable. Liz sipped her coffee, trying to concentrate on the sketches for Nathan's villa. The project was moving along. Workers had already begun laying the foundation for the fountain, and plant deliveries were scheduled for next week. But her thoughts kept returning to Nathan, to his smile, to his voice, to the way he looked at her as if he saw something she hadn't noticed in herself. His bold proposal at the gala still hung in the air, and though she tried to brush it off, it stirred up feelings in her she didn't want to acknowledge. "Mom, you're daydreaming again," Jacob's voice snapped her out of her reverie. He was standing in the doorway, skateboard tucked under his arm. His dark hair was tousled, and his t-shirt sported the logo of a local rock band. "Sorry," Liz turned, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about work. Are you going to school?" "Yeah," Jacob nodded, but his gaze lingered on her. "Are you okay? You seem kind of, I don't know, weird." "Weird?" Liz laughed, but it was strained. "Just tired, Jake. It's a big project." "Okay then," he shrugged, but a shadow of worry flashed in his eyes. "Dad's in a bad mood too. Didn't you have a fight?" Liz felt her throat tighten. The kids were noticing everything, and it made her feel even more guilty. "No, it's fine," she said, trying to sound convincing. "We just both have a lot of work." Jacob nodded, but he didn't look convinced. He left, slamming the door, and Liz was left alone with her thoughts. She opened her laptop to check her email, and as luck would have it, the first email was from Nathan. "Nathan Crow, Liz, the site is looking better and better. I'd like to discuss lighting details. Could you come to my office today? And maybe we can have dinner afterwards. Work goes better with a glass of wine." Liz felt her cheeks heat up. She knew dinner wasn't just about discussing work. Nathan had made no secret of his interest, and worse, she couldn't deny that she was enjoying it. She began typing a reply, trying to keep her tone professional. "Liz, Nathan, I'll be at the office by 2 p.m. As for dinner, we'll see. I have a busy schedule." She reread the message, hesitating. She needed to set boundaries, but a part of her, the part she was trying to ignore, wanted to agree. Liz sighed and hit send before changing her mind. Nathan's office made her feel both at home and out of place. His office was as stylish as he was: glass walls, modern furniture, fashion runway photos. Nathan greeted her with his usual smile, which made her heart skip a beat. "Liz, you're on time as always," he said, getting up from the table. "Coffee?" "No, thanks." Liz shook her head, laying out the sketches on the table. "Let's get down to business. I brought lighting ideas for the garden." Nathan nodded, but instead of sitting at the table, he came closer, standing next to her. His shoulder lightly touched hers, and Liz felt her skin break out in goosebumps. "It looks amazing," he said, looking at the sketches, but his gaze quickly moved to her. "But you know, Liz, I can't concentrate when you're around." "Nathan," Liz turned to him, trying to sound firm, "we're here to talk about the project." "Of course," he smiled, but there was something playful in his eyes. "But I can't help but notice how you glow when you talk about your business. It's mesmerizing." Liz turned away, feeling her cheeks burn. She knew he was flirting, and that was dangerous. But his words, his closeness, it was like a magnet she couldn't tear herself away from. They discussed lighting for nearly an hour, but Nathan kept turning the conversation personal. He asked about her favorite places in Nashville, about her childhood, even what made her happy. Liz answered, trying to be polite but not too open, but each question pulled her deeper. "So what about dinner?" he asked when they were finished. "I know a place with the best view of the city, and the wine is great." Liz hesitated. She knew she should refuse, but his look, his voice, made it almost impossible. "I'm not sure," she said finally. "I have children, a husband. I can't just stay late like this." "I understand," Nathan nodded, but his smile didn't disappear. "But you deserve a break, Liz. One night, no big deal." She looked at him, feeling her resolve melting away. "Okay," she said quietly, "but just dinner, and just for the project." "Of course," Nathan smiled wider, "just for the project." Dinner was at a rooftop restaurant on a Nashville skyscraper. The view was breathtaking, and the wine was too light for Liz to resist. Nathan was in his element, telling stories of his travels, of fashion shows in Paris, of how he built his empire. Liz listened, laughed, and with each glass her defenses weakened. "Liz, have you ever wondered what would have happened if you'd chosen a different path?" he asked, looking into her eyes. "Not family, not Nashville, but something completely new." She froze, her fingers clenching the stem of the glass. "Sometimes," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "But I have everything I need. My family, my children." "But you're not happy," Nathan leaned closer. "I can see that. You deserve more, Liz. You deserve passion." Liz felt her heart pound. She wanted to protest, to tell him he was wrong, but the words stuck. Instead, she stood up, muttering something about having to go home. When she returned, David was in the living room, looking through some sheet music. He looked up, and Liz felt his eyes studying her. "You're late," he said, his voice even but tense. "With Crow again?" "Yeah," Liz nodded, avoiding his gaze. "We were discussing a project. Dinner with a client, nothing special." "Nothing much," David repeated, and there was bitterness in his voice. "Are you sure, Liz? Because you look like it was more than just dinner." "David, stop it." Liz felt her irritation rise in a wave. "It's work. You don't interrogate me when you're late with Leela." "Leela is different." His voice became sharper. "She doesn't look at me like she wants to eat me." Liz froze, her heart clenching. She knew he was right, but she couldn't admit it. The plane rocked gently through the air, carrying Liz Carter to Los Angeles, where she was to present a garden design for Nathan Crow's villa. She sat by the window, looking out at the endless clouds, but her thoughts were far from the landscape outside. She clutched a folder of sketches in her hands, her fingers nervously fiddling with the corner of the page. This trip was the culmination of months of work, a chance to prove that she could do more. But Nathan Crow, seated a few rows away in business class, was more than just a client. His presence, even from a distance, was like a gentle current running across her skin. Liz glanced at him. Nathan was leafing through a magazine, but as if sensing her attention, he looked up and smiled the same smile that made her heart skip a beat. She quickly looked away, feeling the warmth on her cheeks. The last few weeks had been trying. His flirtations had become more overt, her resistance had weakened, and at home with David the tension had grown more intense. Ever since the gala, where Nathan had suggested they swap partners, Liz had felt like their marriage was hanging by a thread. David had eyed her suspiciously, and she couldn't blame him. "Are you nervous?" Nathan's voice brought her out of her thoughts. He moved closer to her as the flight attendant served drinks. His dark eyes studied her face carefully. "A little," Liz managed to smile, adjusting the folder on her lap. "The presentation is important. I don't want to screw it up." "You won't screw up." Nathan leaned a little closer, his voice soft but confident. "I've seen your sketches, Liz. They're not just good, they're alive." "Thank you," she said, looking away, feeling his words go deeper than she would have liked. but I'm still worried. It's okay, he touched her hand, a light touch, but Liz felt goosebumps run across her skin. You're not alone, I'm with you. Liz nodded, trying not to react to his closeness. She knew she should keep her distance, but his voice, his gaze, made it nearly impossible. Let's go over the presentation again, she suggested, opening the folder. Just to be sure. Nathan smiled but agreed. They discussed the slides, the key points, and the questions investors might ask. But Liz sensed that his attention was on more than just the project. His casual touches, his smile, it was all part of the game she was being drawn into. Los Angeles greeted them with heat and bright sunshine. The presentation was scheduled for the next morning, and Nathan suggested dinner at a restaurant overlooking the ocean to celebrate the final milestone. Liz wanted to refuse, but he insisted, calling it part of the job. Just dinner, Liz, he said as they rode in a taxi from the airport. You're too tense. Relax. Nathan, I have a family. Liz looked at him, trying to sound firm. I don't want this to be misunderstood. No misunderstandings, he raised his hands as if in surrender, but his smile was too confident. Just two professionals discussing a project. Liz nodded, but her inner voice screamed that she was playing with fire. She sent David a quick text saying she had made it, but she didn't mention dinner. It was the first thing she'd kept secret, and the guilt was already beginning to gnaw at her. The restaurant was luxurious, with tables on the terrace, the sound of the waves, the soft glow of candles. Liz had chosen a simple black dress that showed off her figure without being too revealing. Nathan, in a dark shirt and trousers, seemed part of the world, confident, stylish in his element. They ordered wine, and Liz, feeling the tension of the day recede, allowed herself to relax. To you, Liz, Nathan raised his glass, his eyes glittering in the candlelight. To your talent and for making my project special. To the project, she corrected, clinking glasses with him. It's a team effort. Modesty suits you, he smiled, sipping his wine. But I know this wouldn't be possible without you. You're unique. Liz felt her cheeks warm. The wine was relaxing, and she began to speak more freely, talking about her love of gardens, about how she had spent hours as a child at her grandmother's, tending to the roses. Nathan listened, asked questions, and his attention was like a warm blanket wrapping itself around her. What makes you happy, Liz? He asked when their plates were empty. Not work, not family. You. What makes your heart beat faster? Liz froze, her fingers tightening around the stem of her glass. She wanted to say something light, but his gaze, deep and piercing, demanded the truth. I don't know, she admitted quietly. I used to think I did. My children, David, but sometimes it feels like I've lost something of mine. Passion, Nathan leaned closer, his voice almost a whisper. You've lost your passion, Liz, and I can see it because I've been there. She looked at him, feeling her heart pounding. He was so close that she could feel the warmth of his breath. Nathan, I'm married, she said, but her voice was shaking. I have a life I don't want to ruin. I'm not asking you to destroy anything. He touched her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. I just want you to feel alive. Liz knew she should get up and leave, but the wine, his voice, his touch kept her in place. They continued talking, and with each word the line between the professional and the personal grew thinner. When he suggested a walk along the embankment, she agreed, even though a voice inside her screamed that this was a mistake. The embankment was almost empty, just the sound of the waves and the distant hum of the city. Nathan walked beside her, his shoulder brushing hers, and Liz felt her resolve melting. Liz, he stopped, turning to face her. I don't want to pressure you, but I can't pretend I don't care about you. You're special. She looked at him, her heart beating so loudly it drowned out the sound of the ocean. Nathan, I can't, she whispered, but her voice was weak. He stepped closer, his hand brushing her cheek. Liz closed her eyes, feeling her world crumble. And then he kissed her, softly, but with such passion that she trembled. She kissed him back, and in that moment, all her barriers crumbled. Let's go to my place, Nathan whispered, moving away, but not letting go of her gaze. Liz knew she should say no. But the wine, his closeness, her own desire, it was all too much. Okay, she whispered, her voice shaking. But just today. They reached his hotel room, and it all happened quickly, like a fever dream. Nathan was gentle but insistent, his touch stirring up feelings in Liz that she had long forgotten. She gave herself over to the moment, forgetting about David, about the children, about her life in Nashville. It was explosive, like release, but when it was over, she lay next to him, feeling a wave of guilt wash over her. Are you okay? Nathan turned to her, his voice soft. I don't know. Liz looked at the ceiling, her voice barely audible. It was a mistake. Don't say that. He touched her shoulder. It was real, Liz. It made you feel alive. She didn't answer, just stood up, gathering her clothes. Her hands shook as she dressed. I have to go, she said without looking at him. Liz, Nathan sat up in bed. This isn't the end. You know there's something between us. She shook her head, feeling tears welling up. I can't, Nathan. I have a family. She walked out of the room, feeling like her world was crumbling. In her hotel room, she took a shower, trying to wash away the guilt, but it clung to her like wet sand. She looked at her phone, a text from David. David, how are you? Presentation tomorrow. Liz sat in a taxi speeding from the Nashville airport to her home, looking out the window at the familiar streets. Her fingers tightened on the strap of her bag, and a mixture of guilt and confusion throbbed in her chest. She had spent the previous night in Los Angeles with Nathan Crowe, and the act weighed heavily on her heart. The presentation of the garden had gone off without a hitch, the investors had been thrilled, and the project had been greenlit, but Liz couldn't feel good. She felt like a traitor, and every time she looked in the mirror, she was reminded of what she had done. The taxi pulled up in front of her house, a two-story suburban building surrounded by a garden she had designed herself. Liz stepped out, inhaling the familiar scent of magnolia blossoms, but even that brought no relief. She walked into the house, dropping her bag by the door. The living room was quiet, the kids were at school, and David was probably in the studio. Liz went into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter, trying to collect her thoughts. Her phone vibrated, and she jumped. A message from Nathan. Nathan Crowe, Liz, yesterday was incredible. You were incredible. When you get back to Nashville, let's meet up. We need to celebrate. Liz deleted the message without replying. She couldn't let herself get sucked into this again. The night with Nathan had been a mistake, a moment of weakness, warmed by wine and his charm. But now, in the cold light of day, she saw that she had put everything on the line. Her family, her marriage, her future. She loved David, she loved Sophia and Jacob, but why did her thoughts keep returning to Nathan? To his touch, to his voice, to the way he made her feel alive. Mom, you're back, Sophia's voice came from the hallway. Liz turned around, forcing a smile. Her daughter came flying into the kitchen, her blonde hair pulled back into a messy ponytail, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Hi, Sophie, Liz hugged her, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. How was school? It's fine, Sophia shrugged, opening the fridge. Rehearsal sucked today. Mrs. Clark told everyone off again. How was your trip? Was the presentation a success? Yeah, it went well, Liz nodded, but her smile was strained. The investors are happy. Cool, Sophia took out the yogurt, but her gaze lingered on her mother. You seem kind of tired. Is everything okay? Just a flight, Liz waved it off, taking a sip of water. And a lot of work. Sophia nodded, but Liz could tell that her daughter didn't quite believe it. She had always been observant, like David, and that scared Liz. She was afraid that her guilt would be written all over her face, that Sophia or Jacob would notice that something was wrong. Worst of all, that David would notice. Jacob stumbled into the kitchen, throwing his skateboard by the door. Mom, did you bring anything back from L.A.? He asked, grabbing an apple from the table. Like a souvenir? Oh, Jake, I'm sorry. Liz shook her head. I was too busy. Okay, he grinned. but his eyes studied her carefully. Daddy said you'd be back today. He's in the studio with Leela again. Liz felt a twinge of jealousy at the mention of Leela, but she quickly caught herself. She had no right to be jealous, not after what she had done. Okay, she said, trying to sound casual. I'll take a shower now and start making dinner. The children went to their rooms and Liz went upstairs, feeling weak on her feet. In the bathroom, she turned on the hot water, hoping the shower would wash away some of her guilt. But standing under the spray, she thought back to the night with Nathan his hands, his lips, his words. It had been a fever dream, but now reality had caught up with her. She had betrayed David, betrayed their family, and the thought was like a knife in her chest. When she came downstairs, David was back. He was sitting in the living room, leafing through some music, his dark hair slightly tousled, his face looking tired. Liz paused in the doorway, unsure of what to say. Hi, she forced a smile, sitting down on the sofa opposite. How are things in the studio? Fine, David looked up, his eyes attentive as always. Leela recorded a couple of tracks. I think the album will be a hit. And you? A presentation? It went great, Liz nodded, trying not to look away. The investors approved the project. Now all that's left is to implement it. Cool, David nodded, but his voice was even, almost cold. You didn't answer my messages yesterday. I called. Liz felt her heart tighten. She remembered leaving her phone in the room when she went to the boardwalk with Nathan, and then she swallowed the lump in her throat. I'm sorry, she said. It was late, I was tired, and my phone was dead. Aha, David looked at her, his gaze like an X-ray. You were with Crow. Yeah, Liz nodded, trying to sound calm. We were discussing a project. Dinner with a client, nothing special. Nothing special, he repeated, and there was a slight mockery in his voice. Are you sure, Liz? Because you look, I don't know, guilty. Liz froze, her fingers clutching the cushion on the couch. She wanted to deny it all, to say that he was wrong, but his gaze was so penetrating, as if he saw right through her. David, it's just work, she said, her voice shaking. You know how it is. You're the one who's been late with Leela. Leela is different, his voice sharpened. She doesn't ask me to spend the weekend with her, Liz, and your Crow. I've seen the way he looks at you, and you don't pull away. That's not true, Liz felt her cheeks heat up. I didn't do anything, David. You're making this up. Making it up? He stood up, his eyes narrowing. Liz, I've known you for 18 years. You can't lie to me without me noticing. She opened her mouth to object, but the words stuck. David, she swallowed, her voice shaking. It's just work. I was busy with a presentation. My phone died. It died, he repeated, his eyes narrowing. Are you serious? Liz, I called you at midnight, and at 1 in the morning. You didn't answer. Where have you been? Liz felt her cheeks heat up. She remembered leaving her phone in the room when she went to the boardwalk with Nathan, and then her throat tightened, and she knew she couldn't lie anymore. I was with Nathan, she said quietly, looking at the table. We were having dinner, discussing the project. It was late. David slammed the mug down on the table with such force that the coffee spilled over the edge. We were having dinner. His voice was low, almost threatening. Liz, don't lie to me. I know you. You weren't just having dinner. What happened? Liz looked up, her eyes filling with tears. She wanted to deny it, but his look, full of pain and suspicion, broke her. I made a mistake, she whispered, her voice shaking. It was one night, David. I didn't mean to. It just happened. The silence that followed her words was deafening. David looked at her, his face unmoving, but Liz could see his eyes darken with pain. It happened, he repeated, his voice hoarse. You slept with him, with Crow. Liz nodded, unable to speak. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she made no attempt to wipe them away. It was a mistake, she said finally. I was drunk, tired. I don't know how it happened. But I love you, David. I don't want to lose you. Do you love me? David laughed, but it was bitter, almost evil. Liz, you went with him knowing it would destroy us. You knew he wanted you, and you chose him. No, Liz shook her head, her voice growing louder. It wasn't a choice, David. It was a weakness. I don't want him. I want you, our family. David turned away, his hands clenched into fists. You want me to believe that it doesn't mean anything, he said, not looking at her. After he suggested this partner swap of his, after you came home for months with that look. What look? Liz stood up, her voice shaking with desperation. David, I'm trying to be honest. I made a mistake, but I don't want him. I want us. Us, David turned to her, his eyes full of pain. Liz, I can't be the second choice. I can't live knowing you chose him, even for one night. Liz felt her heart squeeze. She wanted to go to him, to touch him, but his gaze stopped her. Please, David, she whispered. We can fix this. I'll do anything to fix this. He shook his head, his face stony. I don't know, Liz. I don't know if I can forget this. He took the keys and walked out, slamming the door. Liz was left standing in the middle of the kitchen, her tears dripping onto the table. She knew the truth would destroy them, but she hadn't expected it to hurt so much. She had betrayed David, and now she had to live with the consequences. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Liz went to the office, but couldn't concentrate. Her colleague Sarah noticed her state and tried to defuse the situation. Liz, you're like a ghost, Sarah said, peering into her office. The presentation was awesome, and you look like the world has ended. What happened? Nothing. Liz shook her head, pretending to look at the monitor. I'm just tired. Tired, Sarah narrowed her eyes. Is it because of the crow? Was he flirting again? Liz froze, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She wanted to tell Sarah everything, but she couldn't. Instead, she forced a smile. No, it's fine, she said. Just a lot of work. Sarah didn't look convinced, but she didn't press the issue. When Liz returned home, the house was empty. The children were away at extracurricular activities, and David seemed to be staying late at the studio. Liz sat in the living room, looking at the family photos on the mantelpiece. Their wedding, their early days with Sophia, their picnic with Jacob, it all seemed distant, like someone else's life. It was already dark when David returned. He walked into the living room without looking at her and threw his jacket on the sofa. We need to talk, he said, his voice cold. But not now. I can't. David, please. Liz stood up, her voice shaking. I know it's my fault, but I want to fix this. Fix it? He turned to her, his eyes full of pain. Liz, you slept with another man. How are you going to fix it? I don't know, she swallowed back her tears. But I'm ready to do anything. Please give me a chance. David shook his head, his face unmoving. I don't know, Liz. I don't know if I can live with this. He went into the guest room, leaving her alone. Liz sank down on the couch, her tears flowing silently. She knew her mistake could cost her everything, and now she had to fight for what she had destroyed. But deep down, she was afraid it was too late. The silence in the Carter house was oppressive, as if the air had grown heavier since Liz's confession. It had been a day since she had told David about her affair with Nathan Crow, and since then their home had become a battleground, where words had replaced silence and looks had replaced accusations. Liz sat in the living room, clutching a pillow, her blue eyes red from the tears she had cried the night before. She lay awake, replaying the conversation with David in her head, his words, I can't be second choice. Those words cut her like a knife, but she knew she had earned them. David was asleep in the spare room, and Liz felt his absence from their bedroom like a hole in her chest. She wanted to make things right, but she didn't know where to start. Her thoughts were a jumble of guilt over the night with Nathan, fear of losing her family, and worse, a tiny, traitorous part of her that still remembered that night with awe. Liz hated herself for it, but she couldn't deny that Nathan had stirred up feelings in her that she'd long since buried. The morning began with the usual bustle of Sophia and Jacob getting ready for school, but even they noticed the tension. Sophia, usually talkative, was silent, shooting worried glances at Liz. Jacob, as always, tried to lighten the mood with jokes, but his usual energy seemed muted. "Mom, haven't you slept again?" Jacob asked, grabbing a piece of toast from the table. "You have bags under your eyes like a zombie." "Thanks for the compliment." Liz managed a smile as she poured him some juice. "It's just a lot of work." "Yeah," Jacob narrowed his eyes. "And why is Dad sleeping in the guest room? Did you have a fight?" Liz froze, her fingers tightening around the decanter. She couldn't tell the children the truth, but their powers of observation, inherited from David, made lying nearly impossible. "Just adult stuff," she said, trying to sound calm. "No big deal." "Okay then," Jacob shrugged, but his eyes said he didn't believe it. Sophia remained silent, but her eyes were full of questions. With the kids gone, Liz was alone. She opened her laptop to distract herself, but her mind was far from work. She knew she had to do something to save her marriage. An idea came to her unexpectedly, and it made Liz feel both hopeful and terrified. What if she offered David his freedom for one night? It might even out their mistakes, make him feel less humiliated. It was a risky thought, but Liz clung to any hope. David returned home late in the afternoon, his face tired and his eyes cold. He threw his jacket on the couch and headed for the refrigerator without looking at Liz. "David," Liz stood up, her voice shaking. "We need to talk." He turned, his gaze heavy. "About what, Liz? About how you slept with Crow? I've heard it all before." "Please," she stepped closer, her hand shaking. "I know it's my fault, but I want to fix it. I want us back." "Give it back?" David laughed, but it was bitter. "Liz, you ruined everything. How are you going to get it back?" She swallowed, gathering her strength. I was thinking," she began, her voice barely audible. "Maybe you need freedom too. One night, for us to be equals." David froze, his eyes narrowing. "Are you serious?" His voice was low, almost threatening. "You're suggesting that I sleep with someone to, what, to make it easier for you to live with what you've done?" "No," Liz shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I want you to stop feeling like you're second best. I want us to be able to move on." "Move on," he repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Liz, do you think this is a game? You slept with another guy, and now you're asking me to do the same, like it'll fix everything." "I don't know how to fix it," Liz almost screamed, her voice shaking. "But I don't want to lose you, David. I'll do anything to fix it." He looked at her, his face motionless, but a mixture of pain and anger flashed in his eyes. "Okay," he said finally, his voice cold. "You want me to be on equal terms? I'll think about it." Liz felt her heart clench. She hadn't expected him to agree, and now her own offer felt like a trap. "David," she began, but he raised his hand, stopping her. "No, Liz," he said. "You wanted this. Now give me time." He went into the guest room, leaving her alone. Liz sank onto the couch, her tears flowing silently. She had hoped that her offer would help, but instead it only deepened the gap between them. The next day, Liz went to the office, but work was not going well. She looked at the sketches of the garden, but all she saw was David's face, his cold gaze. Her colleague Sarah noticed her state and tried to diffuse the situation. "Liz, you're like a zombie," Sarah said, peering into her office. "What's wrong with you? The presentation was awesome." "Yeah," Liz nodded, pretending to look at the monitor. "Just tired." "Is it because of Crow?" Sarah narrowed her eyes. "He called again and wanted another meeting." Liz felt her heart clench. She didn't want to see Nathan, not now, when her marriage was falling apart. "Tell him I'm busy," she said quietly. "I can't now." Sarah nodded, but her eyes were full of questions. Liz knew she couldn't avoid Nathan for long, but right now she needed to focus on David. That night David returned late, his face grim. Liz sat in the living room waiting for him. "David," she began as he walked in, "can we talk?" He looked at her, his eyes tired. "I did it, Liz," he said, his voice even but cold. You wanted us to be equals. I spent the night with Leela. Liz felt her world crumble. She expected it, but reality hit like lightning. With Leela? Her voice trembled. Are you serious? You were the one who suggested it, David shrugged, but his eyes were full of pain. Now we're even, right? Liz opened her mouth, but no words came. She wanted to scream, to cry, but instead she just nodded. I understand, she whispered, but it doesn't fix anything, does it? No, David shook his head. It doesn't fix it. It just makes it worse. The gray light of an overcast morning filtered through the blinds of the Carters' living room, where Liz sat on the couch, nervously fiddling with the hem of her sweater. It had been a week since David had confessed to spending the night with Leela, a singer from his studio, and since then their home had become a no-go zone. They barely spoke, avoiding each other like two magnets with the same poles. Liz felt like their marriage was falling apart, and her desperate attempt to equalize their mistakes had only made it worse. Today was their first session with couples therapist Dr. Sarah Mills, and Liz hoped it would be a lifeline, although deep down she feared it was too late. She glanced at her watch. 9:30 am. David was due back from the studio to go to a consultation with her. Liz had asked for time off from work, telling Sarah she had personal matters. Sarah had tried to pry for details, but Liz had brushed them off, unable to talk about what was going on in her life. Her mind was filled with guilt over the night with Nathan, the pain of David's confession, and the fear that their children, Sophia and Jacob, would soon notice their family crumbling. The door slammed and David walked in, throwing his keys on the hall table. His dark hair was tousled, and there were shadows under his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Liz stood up, trying to catch his eye, but he walked past, heading toward the kitchen. Are you ready? She asked, her voice shaking. The show is at 10. Yeah, David nodded, pouring himself some coffee. His voice was cold, distant. Let's just do it. Liz swallowed, feeling her throat tighten. She wanted to say something to ease the tension, but words seemed useless. Instead, she grabbed her bag and headed for the car. David followed her, and they drove in silence, the only sound being the hum of the engine. Dr. Sarah Mills' office was in downtown Nashville, a small building with a cozy interior, soft couches, pastel walls, the scent of lavender. Sarah, a woman in her 50s with warm eyes and short gray hair, greeted them with a smile that seemed to melt the ice. Liz, David, it's good to see you, she said, gesturing to two chairs across from her desk. Sit down. Would you like some water or coffee? No, thank you. Liz shook her head, sitting down. David silently took the chair next to her, crossing his arms over his chest. Sarah sat up, opening her notebook. I received your preliminary notes, she began, her voice calm but firm. You both wrote that your marriage was in crisis. I'd like to begin by having you share what brought you here. Liz, will you begin? Liz felt her heart pounding. She looked at David, but he was looking at the floor, his face motionless. I made a mistake, she began, her voice shaking. I slept with a client, Nathan Crow, during a trip to Los Angeles. It was a one-night stand, and I regret it. I love David, I want to save our marriage, but he can't forgive me. Sarah nodded, making a note on her notepad. Thanks for your honesty, Liz. David, is there anything else you'd like to add? David looked up, his eyes full of pain. She didn't just sleep with him, he said, his voice hoarse. She flirted with this guy for months, knowing he wanted her. And then she asked me to do the same so we could be on equal terms. And I agreed. Spent the night with another woman. But it didn't help. It only made things worse. Liz felt her cheeks heat up. Hearing that from David in front of Sarah was like a blow. I tried to fix it, she said quietly. I thought if we were equal, you wouldn't feel like second best. Second, David turned to her, his voice growing louder. Liz, I don't want to be equal in this. I didn't want to sleep with Leela. I did it because you pushed me, but that doesn't erase what you did. Sarah raised her hand, calling for calm. Let's get this straight, she said. Liz, you admit your mistake and want to save your marriage. David, you feel betrayed, and your response the night with Leela was an attempt to cope with the pain, right? David nodded, but his gaze was heavy. I don't know how to live with this, he said. Every time I look at Liz, I see her with him, and I can't turn it off. Liz felt tears welling up. David, I love you, she said, her voice shaking. I know it's my fault, but I don't want him. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness. A moment of weakness, David shook his head. Liz, you let him flirt with you for months. You knew he wanted you, and you didn't stop him. And then you went with him. How can I trust you after that? Sarah made another note. David, I hear your pain. Liz, do you understand why David feels humiliated? Liz nodded, her eyes filling with tears. Yes, she whispered. I understand. I hate myself for it. But I want to fight for us. I'm ready to do anything. And you, David? Sarah looked at him. Are you ready to fight for marriage? Or have you already made your decision? David was silent, his fingers gripping the arms of the chair. I don't know, he said finally. I love Liz, but I can't forget, and I don't want to live knowing that I'm her second choice. Liz felt her heart squeeze. You're not second, she said, her voice full of despair. You're my life, David. You, Sophia, Jacob, you're everything to me. Then why did you do it? His voice broke. Why did you choose him? Liz opened her mouth, but found no words. She wanted to explain that it was not a choice, but a weakness fueled by wine and his charm, but the words sounded empty even to her. Sarah broke the silence. You're both deeply hurt, she said. Liz, you admit your guilt, but David, you made a choice too, agreeing to spend the night with Leela. It doesn't make you equal, it just deepens the pain. You need time to figure out what you want. I suggest we meet again in a week. In the meantime, think about what your marriage means to you. And Liz, think about why you gave in to temptation. Liz nodded, wiping away tears. David was silent, his face unmoving. When they left the office, he headed for the car without saying a word. Liz followed him, feeling her hope fading. At home, they continued to avoid each other. David went into the spare room, and Liz stayed in the living room, looking at family photos. She knew she had to fight, but David's words, I can't be a second choice, echoed in her head. She was afraid he was right, and the thought was unbearable. The dim light of the setting sun flooded the Carters' kitchen, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. Liz sat at the table, mechanically chopping vegetables for dinner, but her mind was elsewhere. It had been a week since their first session with Dr. Sarah Mills, and the tension in the house had only grown since then. David barely spoke to her, spending his days in the studio and his nights in the spare room. Liz felt trapped. Her guilt over her night with Nathan Crow and the pain of David's confession about his night with Leela were mingled in a knot that was choking her from the inside. She tried to cling to hope that their marriage could be saved, but with each passing day that hope was fading. The door slammed and Liz jumped. David walked in, throwing his keys on the hall table. His dark hair was tousled and his face looked even more tired than usual. He walked into the kitchen without looking at her and opened the refrigerator, taking out a bottle of water. You're early, Liz said, trying to sound neutral. Her voice shook despite her best efforts. How's the studio? It's fine, David shrugged, taking a sip of water. His eyes avoided hers, and it cut her like a knife. Leela finished the track. We'll start mixing soon. That's good, Liz nodded, continuing to chop carrots. She wanted to say something else to break the silence, but the words felt empty. David looked at her, his gaze heavy, almost accusing. Liz, we need to talk, he said finally, his voice low and determined. She froze, her fingers clenching the knife. Okay, she answered quietly, putting the knife down and wiping her hands on a towel. About what? He leaned against the countertop, crossing his arms. I've been thinking all week, he began, his voice even but pained. About us, about what you did, about what I did. And I can't go on. Liz felt her heart squeeze. What do you mean? Her voice shook, though she tried to keep it together. David, We agreed to fight. We were at Sarah's. Liz, stop, he cut her off, his eyes finally meeting hers. I can't live knowing that you chose him, even for one night. And what I did to Leela, it didn't fix anything. It just showed how broken we both are. We're not broken. Liz stepped toward him, her eyes filling with tears. We can fix this, David. I know I'm to blame, but I love you. I want us back. Take him back. He shook his head, his voice sharper. Liz, you don't understand. Every time I look at you, I see you with him. I see how you wanted him, how you went with him, knowing it would destroy us, and I can't turn it off. Liz felt tears running down her cheeks. Please, she whispered, I'll do anything to fix this. We can go to Sarah, we can. I filed for divorce, he interrupted, his voice cold but his eyes flashing with pain. Yesterday, I saw a lawyer. The papers will arrive soon. Liz froze, her breath caught in her throat. The word divorce hit her like a hammer. She knew their marriage was in trouble, but until that moment she had clung to the hope that they could make it work. Divorce? Her voice was barely audible. David, are you serious? After 18 years? Because of one night? This isn't just one night, Liz. He looked at her, his face set in stone. This is months of you letting him flirt, of you wanting him. You think I didn't see? I'm not blind. And then you pushed me toward Leela, like that would fix everything. But this isn't a game, Liz. This is our life. I know, Liz swallowed, her tears flowing silently. I know it's my fault, but I love you. I don't want to lose you, our children. The kids, David shook his head, his voice quieter. I don't want to hurt them, Liz, but I can't live with you knowing you chose someone else. Not even for one night. I can't be the second choice. Liz sank into a chair, her legs giving way. What? What will happen to the children? She asked, her voice shaking. To Sophia, to Jacob. I want Jacob to live with me, David said, his voice firm. Sophia's an adult now, she'll decide for herself. We'll split the house, or I'll buy it. A lawyer will handle everything. Liz felt her world crumble. She wanted to scream, to beg, but his gaze cold, determined said he had made his decision. Please, David, she whispered, give me a chance. We can make this right. I gave you a chance, he said, his voice full of pain. When you confessed, I tried. But I can't, not after everything. He turned and walked into the guest room, leaving Liz alone. She sat there, staring at the half-cut vegetables, her tears dripping onto the table. She knew she had ruined their marriage, but the reality hit her with renewed force. Divorce. The word sounded like a death sentence, and Liz didn't know how to move on. The next day she went to the office, but work was not going well. Her colleague Sarah noticed her condition and tried to defuse the situation. Liz, you're like a ghost, Sarah said, peering into her office. What's wrong with you? You haven't been well since you got back from LA. It's all complicated, Liz shook her head, pretending to look at the monitor. Personal matters. Is it because of Crow? Sarah narrowed her eyes. Or because of David? Liz froze, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She wanted to tell Sarah everything, but the words were stuck. It's family, she said finally. I don't want to talk about it. Sarah nodded, but her gaze was full of sympathy. If anything happens, I'm here, she said before leaving. Liz was left alone, her thoughts racing back and forth between David, their conversation, his words about divorce. She knew he was right, she had broken their trust by allowing Nathan to become more than a client. But the thought of their marriage ending was unbearable. When she got home, the kids were there. Sophia was in the living room, staring at her phone, and Jacob was playing a video game. Liz wanted to talk to them, but she didn't know how to start. She was afraid that the truth about her cheating and divorce would ruin their relationship with her. Mom, are you okay? Sophia looked up, her voice quiet. You and Dad, you've been acting weird lately. Liz swallowed, her eyes filling with tears. We have problems, Sophie, she said, her voice shaking. But we love you. This isn't about you. Is this about your client? Jacob put the controller down, his gaze serious. Dad said you worked with him a lot. Liz felt her throat tighten. She couldn't tell the kids the truth, not now. It's complicated, she said, but we'll figure it out. I promise. The rain pounded the roof of the Carter house, creating a monotonous rhythm that only increased Liz's sadness. She stood at the living room window, looking out at the wet garden that had once been her pride. It had been a week since David had announced their divorce, and since then their house had felt like a foreign place, cold, empty, devoid of warmth. Liz felt like a ghost, wandering through familiar rooms, but finding no solace in them. Her guilt over the night with Nathan Crowe and the pain of David's decision had combined to form a lump in her chest, making it difficult to breathe. David moved into the guest room permanently, and their conversations were reduced to short conversations about the children and household chores. Sophia and Jacob, sensing the tension, became quieter, more cautious, as if afraid to upset the delicate balance. Liz tried to hold on for them, but every glance in the mirror reminded her of her mistake. She avoided work, afraid to run into Nathan, but his shadow still haunted her in her thoughts, in her dreams, in her guilt. The phone vibrated on the table, and Liz jumped. She looked at the screen, a message from Sarah, her colleague. Sarah, Liz, have you heard about Crowe? He's been missing for 3 days. The police are looking for him. What the hell is going on? Liz froze, her heart pounding. She reread the message, trying to process the words. Nathan was missing. It seemed impossible the man who had been so alive, so confident, had simply vanished. She pulled up the news on her phone, and the headlines confirmed. Fashion mogul Nathan Crowe missing after Miami party. Police suspected a connection to a shady deal related to his business, but there was no trace. Liz felt a strange mixture of relief and fear. Relief because Nathan would no longer tempt her, no longer remind her of her weakness. Fear because his disappearance seemed ominous, as if her own guilt had materialized. She closed the phone, her hands shaking. "Mom, are you okay?" Sophia's voice brought her out of her thoughts. Her daughter was standing in the doorway, holding a literature textbook. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and her eyes were worried. "Yeah," Liz managed to smile, but her voice was weak. "I just read the news." "What's the news?" Sophia came closer, her gaze wary. "Is it about Dad? Did you quarrel again?" "No," Liz shook her head, trying to sound calm. "It's about my client, Nathan Crowe. He's missing." "Missing?" Sophia frowned. "What do you mean? He's like a celebrity." "I don't know," Liz shrugged, her fingers tightening around her phone. "The police are looking into it." Sophia looked at her, her eyes full of questions. "Mom, does this have anything to do with you?" she asked quietly. "I mean, with you and Dad. You got weird when you started working with him." Liz felt her throat tighten. She couldn't tell Sophia the truth, not about her betrayal, not about how her weakness had destroyed their family. "No, Sophie," she said, her voice shaking. "It's just work. Go to your homework, okay?" Sophia nodded, but her eyes said she didn't believe it. When her daughter was gone, Liz sank down on the couch, her thoughts swirling around Nathan. His disappearance felt unreal, but at the same time, it freed her from his influence. She hated herself for feeling relieved, but she couldn't deny that his absence made her life easier, at least for a while. David returned home late, his jacket wet from the rain. He walked into the living room where Liz was sitting with her laptop, pretending to work. "Did you hear?" she asked, not looking at him. "About Nathan Crowe. He's gone missing." David froze, his eyes narrowing. "Missing," he repeated, his voice even but cold. "So what? Should I care?" Liz looked at him, her heart clenching. "I just thought you should know," she said quietly. "It's weird." "It's weird," David chuckled, taking off his jacket. "Is it weird that your lover disappeared, or is it weird that you care?" "David," Liz stood up, her voice shaking. "It's not fair. I don't want him. It was a mistake, and I'm trying to fix it." "Fix it," he turned to her, his eyes full of pain. "Liz, you can't fix what you did, and I can't live with it. I filed for divorce, and that won't change. Liz felt tears welling up. Please, she whispered. We can try again. For the children, for us. The kids, David shook his head. I don't want to hurt them, Liz. But I can't pretend everything's okay. I can't look at you without seeing him. He went into the guest room, leaving her alone. Liz sank onto the couch, her tears flowing silently. She knew his decision was final, but she couldn't accept it. She had ruined their marriage, and now she had to live with the consequences. The next day at the office, Liz was trying to focus on work, but the news about Nathan was everywhere. Her colleague Sarah walked into the office, her face serious. Liz, did you see? She asked, sitting on the edge of the table. About Crow. The police think it might be connected to some kind of deal. They say he was in Miami with some shady characters. Yes, Liz nodded, her voice weak. I read it. Are you okay? Sarah looked at her, her eyes full of sympathy. You seem kind of, I don't know, lost. I'm just tired, Liz shook her head, pretending to look at the monitor. It was a big project. Sarah didn't look convinced, but she didn't press the issue. If anything happens, I'm here, she said before leaving. Liz was left alone, her thoughts swirling around Nathan. His disappearance scared her, but at the same time she felt relieved he would no longer tempt her, would no longer remind her of her weakness. But that didn't save her marriage. David was adamant, and Liz knew she had to prepare for the worst. When she got home, the kids were there. Sophia was doing her homework in the living room and Jacob was playing a video game. Liz wanted to talk to them, but she didn't know how to start. She was afraid that the truth about her cheating and divorce would ruin their relationship with her. Mom, have you heard about Crow? Jacob asked, putting down his controller. Everyone's talking about it at school. He's your client, right? Yes, Liz nodded, her voice weak. But I don't know what happened. The police are looking into it. That's weird, Sophia looked up from her textbook. Mom, does this have anything to do with you? You and Dad. You've been so weird lately. Liz felt her throat tighten. No, Sophie, she said, her voice shaking. It's just work and grown-up stuff. Don't worry. But their eyes said they didn't believe it. Liz knew she couldn't hide the truth for long, but the thought of telling her children about the divorce was unbearable. She had destroyed their family, and now she had to live with it. The rain had stopped, leaving a damp sheen on the streets of Nashville, but inside the Carter house, the silence was heavier than any storm. Liz sat in the living room, looking at the family photos on the mantel, where the smiles of her and David now seemed so distant. It had been a month since David had filed for divorce, and in that time their lives had completely unraveled. The papers had been signed, the lawyers had settled the property, and David had moved into a small apartment not far from his studio. Liz remained in their home with Sophia and Jacob, but every corner of the house reminded her of what she had lost. The divorce had been quick, too quick, like someone had pulled the rug out from under her. David had insisted that Jacob spend half the time with him, and Sophia, being almost an adult, had control over when she saw her father. Liz felt guilty about the children, but even worse was her guilt about herself. She had destroyed their family in one night with Nathan Crow, and now she had to live with it. Liz picked up a photograph from the mantelpiece, their wedding 18 years ago. She was in a white dress, David in a tuxedo, both laughing, looking at each other with such love that it seemed nothing could separate them. Now that love was buried beneath her mistake and his pain, she replaced the frame, her fingers shaking. The door opened and Sophia walked in, dropping her backpack at the entrance. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a messy bun and her eyes were tired. Mom, are you sitting in the dark again? She asked, turning on the light. Are you okay? Liz forced a smile, but her voice was weak. Yes, Sophie. Just thinking. How was school? It's fine, Sophia shrugged, sitting down on the couch. But Mom, you're not okay. I can see it. Is it because of Dad? Or because of that Crow? Liz froze, her heart sinking. The children knew about the divorce, but she never told them the whole truth. She was afraid they would hate her if they found out about her infidelity. "It's complicated," she said, avoiding her daughter's gaze. "Dad and we made mistakes, but we love you, and this isn't about you." "Mom, I'm not a child." Sophia looked at her voice firm. "I know you were working with Crow, and then he disappeared. And Dad, he changed after your trip to LA. What happened?" Liz swallowed, her eyes filling with tears. She wanted to lie, but Sophia deserved the truth, or at least part of it. "I made a mistake, Sophie," she said quietly. I let work become too personal, and it ruined our marriage." Sophia was silent, her eyes full of pain. "You're with Crow?" she asked finally. "Is this about him?" Liz nodded, unable to speak. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, and she made no attempt to hide them. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. "It was one night, a mistake, but Dad couldn't forgive me." Sophia turned away, her face motionless. "And Dad?" she asked. "He's also with someone?" Liz swallowed, her voice shaking. "Yes," she admitted. I I offered it to him to even things out, but it didn't help. It only made things worse." Sophia stood up, her eyes shining with tears. "You're both so stupid," she said, her voice breaking. "You ruined everything because of some stupid nights." She went into her room, slamming the door. Liz was left alone, her tears dripping onto her pillow. She knew Sophia was right, but she couldn't change anything. Jacob, returning later, was quieter than usual, and Liz realized that he, too, felt the rift in their family. The next day, Liz went to the office, but work was not going well. News of Nathan's disappearance was still making headlines, but the police had found no leads. Liz felt a strange sense of relief his absence meant he would no longer tempt her, but she was also plagued by fear. What if his disappearance had something to do with her? She pushed the thought away, but it kept coming back like a pesky mosquito. Her colleague Sarah walked into the office, her face serious. "Liz, have you seen the news?" she asked, sitting on the edge of the table. "About Crow. The police think he might have been involved in something shady. Maybe that's why he disappeared." "Yeah," Liz nodded, her voice weak. "I read it. It's weird." "Weird is the least of my words," Sarah said, narrowing her eyes. "Are you okay? You've been kind of lost since he disappeared." "I'm just tired," Liz shook her head, pretending to look at the monitor. "And things are complicated at home." Sarah looked at her with sympathy. "If you want to talk, I'm here," she said before leaving. Liz was left alone, her thoughts focused on David. He had moved into an apartment not far from the studio, and she had only seen him when he picked up Jacob. Their interactions were cold, formal, like strangers. Liz knew he was right to leave, but the thought of their marriage ending was unbearable. She had ruined everything in one night, and now she had to live with it. That night, she cooked dinner pasta with pesto, Jacob's favorite, but ate alone. Sophia had gone to a friend's house, and Jacob was at David's. Liz sat at the table, looking at the empty chairs, and felt her heart clench. She wanted to call David, to beg him to come back, but she knew it was useless. He had made his choice, and she couldn't blame him. David, meanwhile, sat in his new apartment, surrounded by boxes he had never unpacked. His studio was a stone's throw away, and working with Leela and the other artists provided a distraction. But every night he returned to an empty apartment, he felt pain. He loved Liz, but her betrayal, her choice of Nathan, even for one night, had shattered his trust. The night with Leela, which she insisted he agreed to, had only deepened his sense of emptiness. He didn't want her, he didn't want anyone but Liz, but he couldn't live with her knowing she had chosen someone else. He opened his laptop and began working on a new track, but his thoughts kept returning to Liz. He remembered their wedding, their early years, Sophia and Jacob's laughter, their picnics in the garden. It had all been their life, but now it seemed distant, like someone else's story. David knew the divorce was the right decision, but that didn't make it any easier. He felt relieved to be free of a marriage marred by betrayal, but the pain of losing the past was as sharp as a knife. Liz sat in her empty house, looking at her phone. She wanted to text David, but instead she opened the news. Another headline about Nathan. Police not ruling out criminal link in tycoon's disappearance. Liz closed the phone, her hands shaking. She didn't know what had happened to Nathan, but his absence hadn't saved her family. She was alone, with children who looked at her with disappointment and a house that wasn't a home anymore. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.